Um,
Oh, here we go. Sorry, I just interrupted Antonio. He's our guest for the evening. Good evening, Augustonians. Welcome to summer and welcome back to Lit Friday. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Jessica Lene, the literary curator at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center and the host and curator of our monthly digital program, Lit Friday. If you're new to us, on the final Friday of every month, we host artists, writers, and thinkers of the African diaspora who share presentations of their incredible work and then engage in conversation. And now let's get your calendars updated. Recall that the Black Bottom Film Festival submission window is open. We're looking for films to show, independent films to show at our film festival. It opened on May 19th, and the deadline for submitting your work is on November 17th. On May 31st at 6 p.m., we have a closing reception for the exhibition in the Claude Worthington Benedum Gallery, The Hope of Radiance, a solo show of Imo and Say and May's work. Next month, on June 30th, tune in with us at Lit Friday again. We are welcoming Joseph Earl Thomas to discuss his autobiography, Sink. The New York Times writes, Thomas has constructed a sort of alchemy on the page, but one born of experience, from skill and from a trust about what will end up on the other side, a meticulous, careful construction. I can't wait to finish reading it, and I know you can't wait to hear about it. So return on June 30th for the conversation with Joseph and I. Tonight, we have a Pittsburgh and Erie spotlight. My wonderful former coworker at the Federal Defender's Office of Western Pennsylvania, a painter, muralist, and an amazing memoirist, Antonio Howard. Antonio Howard, Peggy's son, is an autodidactic artist. At the young age of 15, he was incarcerated and sentenced to life in prison, where he served 26 and a half years. While in prison, he educated himself through instructional books on the concepts and processes of visual art. Released in 2018, he is now 45 years old and lives as a valued member of the Erie community, committed to serving others and creating connection points through art that sparks meaningful dialogue. Antonio is the 2019 recipient of Erie Arts and Culture's Emerging Artist Fellowship. He is also a rostered teaching artist through Erie Arts and Culture, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Since 2020, he has participated in the creation of multiple murals throughout Erie County, Whole Foods Co-op mural, the Manus Sunoco Mural honoring 93-year-old veteran educator and Gannon alumni Luther Manus, the MHA Tree of Life mural, 2 City of Erie bandwagons, and a Purple Martin mural on behalf of Bayfront Eastside Taskforce. He is also the author of 3 books, When a Child is Worth More Than the Worst Mistake He Ever Made, which we are discussing this evening, A Black Man and a Spear, and Love is When You Want the Best, parentheses, for someone else. He sits on the board of directors for the Mental Health Association of Northwestern Pennsylvania, and Antonio is an organizing member of the Pardon Project of Erie County, in addition to being an American Bar Endowment Pardon Fellow. He is also a core member of Erie's Participatory Defense, an Erie community organization that offers support to individuals and their loved ones navigating the criminal legal system. When he is not working his day job as an assistant paralegal with the Federal Public Defender for the Western District of Pennsylvania, Antonio is a guest speaker and presenter, focusing on topics related to the criminal legal system and equitable reform. He is also the owner of Murals by Antonio Howard, through which his wife Sarah and he create process-driven, community-centered murals. They work to turn blank walls into opportunities for learning, relationship building, and beautification. All of their mural projects rely heavily on community engagement and participation. So each mural created has a respective list of collaboratives and contributors. You can read more about Antonio at www.antoniohoward.com, on Facebook at antonio.howard.5095110, and on Instagram, where I follow him, at AntonioHoward_artist. Antonio, it's an honor. I am really, really happy that we get to discuss your memoir, and I can't wait to hear you read from it.
I'm honored to be here. I can't wait to start. So the chapter that I'll be reading from is chapter 3, titled "It's Not Your Fault," and it was an ode to my mother, written August 27th, 2005. Dear Mom, nearly 20 years of prison experience has taught me this: that there's no such thing as free time, only time to prepare for the next time you'll need to be prepared. So I've been preparing for this moment, the moment you'd finally ask me, what can I do to help you? Unfortunately, this moment comes at the expense of moments past. The law has changed drastically over the years, so there's not much more that you can do to help me in the ways I once needed. However, there are things I need you to know. First, my being here is not your fault. You didn't fail me. You didn't fail me in your responsibilities as a parent. After you gave birth to me, theoretically, you had 18 years to parent, theoretically. But the fact is, there are only 24 hours in a day. Subtract 8 hours sleep and 8 hours work, you're left with 8 hours per day to raise a child. Multiply that by 365 days in a year, and you get 2,920 hours per year to raise a child. Divide that by 24 hours in a day, it translates to 121 days, 16 hours. Multiply that number by 18 years, and you're left with 2,190 days in an 18-year period. Divide that by 365 days a year. It leaves 6 years to raise a child. Subtract the first 2 years, infancy, and you're left with 4 years. Factor in variables like overtime at a job, time divided between 2 or more children, travel between home and work, the child participating in sports, homework, detention, and in my case, juvenile placements and prison by the age of 15. What remains is the reality that you didn't actually raise me. The rest of the world did. You were left roughly less than 1 year, non-contiguous block of time to be a mom. Not nearly enough time to perfect it. Secondly, we've both made mistakes, but we are not our mistakes. We're what we learn from them. And every mistake we make comes with a second chance, a chance to prove we learned from them. If you've learned anything from your experience with me, my siblings are your second chance to prove it. Thirdly, my life isn't mine anymore. It hasn't been since the day of my arrest. It can even be argued that it was never mine to begin with. Although you can prove maternity, my life never belonged to you either. But only an in-depth study of history can provide you with an understanding of that concept. As it stands now, my life belongs to the state of Pennsylvania and its employees. Maintaining ownership of it provides money to put food on their tables and send their children to college. So, any fight you wage on my behalf is to take jobs from their profiteers of my shortcomings. To put it another way, fighting for my freedom means fighting against a system programmed to defend itself to the death, your death or its own. The system has a human face, sometimes black or white, sometimes male or female, but like all faces, it registers as many different expressions as needed to convince you of whatever it wants to at the time. It also speaks with a human voice, but beware, it has a forked tongue. It will claim to promote bonds between prisoners and their families and send its captives, your children, to opposite ends of the world, making it nearly impossible for you to visit. It'll even inflate the cost of collect calls beyond what you can afford. For families committed even through the roughest times, the system simply waits you out until time eventually takes its toll. The lives of many families have been destroyed by this experience. Families whose enthusiasm, like yours, provides a false sense of preparedness for protracted combat. So, I'll say to you what I would have said to them. Educate yourself on the subject first. Finally, it's important that you build a support system out there for yourself, a support system composed of others who've been affected by this situation and are willing to unite with you for the sake of saving their own children trapped here. Even if you're only able to unite with one other person, it's better than being alone. Because the moment this system knows you're alone, it will interpret your isolation as an opportunity to abuse you and your constitutional rights with impunity. There are millions of women like you, isolated, with no power or meaningful connection to one another because they don't know that they share this experience in common. You have to find them and unite with them. Learning begins with the first opportunity. It doesn't matter if you learn through failure or success, it's still learning. The time between the first opportunity and the second is simply an opportunity to prepare for the moment you'll need to be prepared. Sincerely, Antonio.
You very much read my mind, because one of the questions that I have is about this specific passage of the life or story, the memoir. And it's such a vulnerable piece of correspondence to share. And I think it takes a long time, regardless of experience sometimes, for even adult children to come to their parents with this kind of awareness and forgiveness. And so my question was, what war, because it's this mathematics that you're breaking down, right? And it's a brutality of mathematics. It's a combination of the economic, the social, the gendered, the racial, and how our society operates kind of crystallized into your personal experience. How do you even begin to write such a letter and then decide to share it?
I think I began the decision to write the letter through reading first and foremost, right? It wasn't until I started studying my history, and particularly the history of women's struggle in the Black community, that I actually understood my mother's story in context. Right, prior to that, my perspective about what I had been through was that of nothing more than a victim, and everybody else was a predator, including my mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that my mother was the sum total of the men who were in her life, who abused her, who treated her like crap, who made her believe that she was less than them, and that my mother was purging on me, right? Before making that connection, I would have never written that letter, right? And I'd spoken to my mother over the years, and we had a conversation once, and she would always refer to her abuse of me as discipline. And I asked my mother once, was it discipline when my father was doing it to you? Mm-hmm. And because I was always fighting that battle as a kid to try and get her to understand what she had done to me, right? But what I understood from that conversation, that was my mother was just as much as a victim as I was, and she was trying to get me to understand that by purging, right? We couldn't communicate. And I think reading other people's stories, right, helped me interpret hers in a less offensive way. And I think I was responsible as a man who understood that, to try to mend some of the wounds that men had caused her. I didn't want her to go on thinking that I was yet another man that blamed her for the things that I inspired her to do through my misbehaviors, right? And I wanted her to know that I forgave her, because that was one of the burdens I think she was carrying her whole life. And that was that she was responsible for me being in prison. And I wanted a reprieve from the rest of the world, right? And who am I to demand a reprieve from the rest of the world and not give it, right? Especially first and foremost to my mother. She didn't know how to love me. she only knew what she knew. And once I learned that, it was time for me to forgive her and try to move forward. And this letter was the culmination of that.
What was your decision to put it in the book instead of to keep it private and just between you and she?
So I never wanted, when I wrote this book, it didn't start out as a book. It just started out as journaling. So this was personal and private to me, right? And letter. So when I wrote the book, when I decided to publish the journal, excuse me, it occurred to me that I didn't want people to think that I hated my mother. Like me telling the story of what happened between her shouldn't make people walk away hating my mother, because I didn't even hate my mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understood her in context, which is why this is why I started this particular chapter off with it. Like, these aren't words of condemnation. These are words of forgiveness, and then an assessment of the things that happen through the lens of forgiveness, right? Like talking about people fearing that you can't talk about Black history but through the lens of hate after you assess everything that Black African Americans have been through, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it's not true at all, right? There's a therapy that comes with trying to work through it and understand it, using the best language available to us. And that's exactly why I decided to include it. I didn't want people to walk away believing that my mother was a monster, especially that I didn't forgive her. So.
And right, you talk about reading the experiences of other people. And one thing that struck me about this published journal is the way that it resonated with some of the foundational texts of African American literature. And because my specialty, is Black feminist literature by Black women, as well as art, I thought immediately of all of the texts that were written in the 19th century around abolition. So we have Linda Brent, Harriet Jacobs writing about the loophole of retreat when she hid in an attic for 7 years before she could escape. And this idea of being constantly pursued that you communicate with your mom. Or a letter from Ona Judge to George Washington, her former owner, where she's like, I will never come back and I will constantly run from you. I'm not your property. And having this very clear idea of how this historical hierarchy where Black people are constantly made the nadir of their reality or their society, there's this deep interference in interpersonal relationships. And it's something very strong in the book that you wrote, especially. And so I was wondering what other interpersonal relationships became clearer as you educated yourself during your time in prison.
All of them, right? Including the relationship between Black and white people in general, right? Like, initially, when I started studying history, it was an anger and a frustration at what happened in history and what was happening to me now, right? Because I was always one of them kids who believed that while watching Roots, I could not have been alive during those times because I would not have been a slave, right? I would not have allowed people to hold me captive. And here I was, a 15-year-old sitting inside of a prison cell, right? Experiencing the new slavery in the society and not even recognizing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's my relationships to the world around me, including corrections officers, women, and other men, right? And other African-American men, right? Who too were put through gladiator schools and led to believe that we should all compete against one another. I fully understood in context where I was, and who I would have been in history. And I wanted to honor my former self and our ancestors by becoming someone who I could look up to, right? And writing was a part of that, right? Writing was a part of that, being able to see my way through a sentence, to try and master the English language that allowed me to be understood by those who I wanted to hear me and understood by myself, my former child, the child in me who rejected all information from adults because I thought we were at war, right?
Mm-hmm.
So put everything in context for me.
And so right before we got on, I texted you because I wanted to make sure memoir was the correct word. And since then you've spoken and clarified it was a journal that you published, but you reminded me that in the book you call the publication a lifer's story. So I wanted you to speak to that preference for your chosen description and why that description is meaningful to you.
Well, for one, the most obvious is because at age 15, I was sentenced to life in prison. In Pennsylvania, where life means life without possibility parole, meaning I'm not supposed to be sitting here out in society, even speaking to you in this form, right? I was condemned to die in prison, period. And my story, I didn't fully believe was my life story because I didn't feel like my life was over. I felt like I still had a lot of life left to live. So I wanted it to be referred to as a lifer story. This was one component of a lifer serving life who was telling a story about his existence as a lifer, but I would not always be a lifer. And sure enough, I'm no longer a lifer. So it was a bit prophetic. But I wanted people to understand that this was a part of my life. And this is a part of life that a lot of us go through that will never be told except from the perspective of our abusers and people who write themselves into our history as being heroes instead of who they actually are. And my voice being heard through my writing is an honor and something I actually never thought would really happen. I was writing this journal and published a book as a way of not having to keep repeating myself. Right? Every time you meet somebody, every time someone wants to know how you became who you are, telling that story over and over again, and then having to be challenged about your experiences. Yeah,
So thinking about craft, this is another aspect of the book that I adored. It was your self-rescue through your attention to craft in your painting, craft in your writing, craft in your poetry, the minute kind of details of your creative projects. And so how old were you when you began writing the journal? How old were you when it became a publication of collected entries? And what was required of you as an artist and an individual to make this leap from the private space of your journal and to turn the journal into what it is now?
So I started writing long before I can remember writing, right? So writing for me was always an outlet. So my journal started actually before I realized it was a journal. So which is why I included letters here. So when I started writing letters and keeping them, and then years later having them to read over again, I had already grew years beyond the letters that I had written, but it always shocked me how forward those letters were even at the age that I was before. So I started keeping those and culling those. And I used to write a lot too when I was in juvenile placements and I was in Glen Mills. I was actually in a journalism class. And I remember losing home passes and being ostracized by my dorm because I was writing raps in my journal at that time. And my raps were offensive to some people who read them after they had found them. They had no reason to find them. So I was always leery about keeping a journal, a formal journal, interestingly enough. So when I started collecting my letters and compiling my letters, I decided to start keeping another notebook. And I would write, and I think it was like in 2004 when I actually started becoming conscious of it. And it would be like, short sentences, short paragraphs, just things that I experienced during the day and stuff like that. And before you know it, I started writing longer entries that ended up being haphazard essays. And once I got to SCI Huntington, which was in, I think it was like 2011, maybe. In 2012, I actually published the book. And I would send my notes to a friend of mine by the name of Mozon, and we would have discussions about them. And those little entries would turn into discussions that inspired me to write more. And before you know it, Mozon was coming back to me like, I understand you a lot better now, right? Because even though we were really close friends, like he would always say things like, man, you need to grow some more. You've been through a lot. I don't know what you've been through, but after reading it, he was really blown away.
As was I, yeah.
I was.
I texted you immediately.
Yeah, I was, right? Because essentially, for somebody to appreciate what I had written was an honor and was validation too, right? And he walked away with kind of the same objective that I wanted him to, and that was just to understand me better. This wasn't a diatribe about the things that happened in my life. This wasn't me venting or purging on people who had hurt me. In fact, me writing clarified for me all the support systems I had over the years that I couldn't see prior to putting it on paper. I couldn't see it prior to putting it on paper, but once I started to, once that this chronology started to come together, like, wow, I know people say this over and over, but I was blessed. Despite my abuse, despite the things I've been through, there were always people in my life who tried to shuttle me from one place in my life to another safely, even though I may not have acknowledged it, and they may not have done it successfully 100%. They tried, and writing and journaling allowed me to see that a lot more clearly.
And so you list some books that were foundational for you in the text, but I wanted to ask you about your literary or artistic mentors. We're not always mentored by the individual sometimes as much as we're mentored by their writing or their artwork or a speech that they've given. Like so many of us have been mentored by Dr. Martin Luther King without even ever having the opportunity to have met him interpersonally, of course, right? And so I was wondering who shepherded you that wasn't a physical person around you through the most challenging parts of your time in prison, and also the compilation of your book.
I think one of the people I mentioned in there was Ayanna Van Zandt. In her text, The Spirit of a Man. Like I understood the volatility of my being through reading that book, right? Another was Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston. The way she wrote and put things into context for me was pivotal, right? I remember her explaining once in a book called Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I'm paraphrasing here, right? And she says, and this is one of the things that helped me understand my mom as well. She said, when the white man throw down his tote, he tell his N-word man to pick it up. And he pick it up, but he don't tote it. He tell his N-word woman to pick it up. The N-word woman is the mule of the world. That was so powerful to me, and eloquently and simply explain the stratification of oppressions across gender and race that I thought I understood before prior to reading her words. I mean, that was heavy to me. Sister Sonia Sanchez, primarily Black women, Sister Soldier.
I love her work.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and others. So yeah.
Also thinking about, so there were parts as a Black woman in my life, right? I've experienced loved ones who have gone away for a very long time. So always had the experience from the outside in. My first experience being kind of on the inside and looking out was working with you when we were at the Federal Defender's Office. But there are so many patterns in the book that you show about the system and the illogics, the excesses of the abuse, from using, MMA style physical tactics against children to making up files and making horrific assumptions meant to actually bury people who are incarcerated, who are actually trying to find a productive way through their experience and through their time. And it seemed almost there's a short story by Franz Kafka. And in the story, there's an individual in America, and Franz Kafka is from Eastern Europe, who's been punished, and he's made to lie down in a giant machine, carves his crime into his back. And it's such an excessive kind of imagery that even he in his time could see as a part of like the carceral punishment system of the United States. But for this, of course, it's real, and it's a process of just why, right? Though, like for me as a reader, I was like, what kind of sense does this make to anybody? And and it's a gaslighting too, right? For as much as you attempted to speak for yourself, you were always gaslit out of your experience as you were experiencing these things. And I wanted to know if you could speak more to what you learned the function of that is, if you found that it served anything in that system at all, aside from crushing a person's humanity.
Yeah. So my writing, although it does critique the prisons and the institution itself as a whole, is on a larger level a critique of the behaviors of adults. I mentioned before that stratification of oppression and a hierarchy when we talk about especially the carceral system. It is a system composed of adults. And I was a child at the time. So it's easy for me to assess the flaws, not based upon my imprisonment, but based upon me being challenged by adults. And so I found a way to write on behalf of my former self, talking about adults who just happen to be corrections officers, who just happen to run that institution or those institutions, right? But it's a problem with how adults treat children. It's a problem with how adults treat children. And when I was capturing my experience, all of these similarities became so apparent to me. All of them, even when I was analyzing my experiences from the perspective of chattel slavery and the new slavery. It was like, even if I was victorious in overcoming all of these obstacles, I was still a child, and I was still the lowest of the low in society, essentially. So I would never be victorious until I became an adulthood, right? Until I became a man, until I was able to grow out of that. And then once I became that, my fight would just be beginning to be identified as a human being, as a Black man. So it's so there's all these intersectionalities of oppression and abuse. And like you mentioned, the gaslighting, because I couldn't even get to defend or fighting against the gaslighting of being an African-American man, because I wasn't even a man yet. I had to fight against the gaslighting of being a child with lived experiences, who actually went through something, who was minimized by everybody else as not really going through anything because my experiences didn't match the adults who was challenging that experience, right? So I had to get there first through those experiences. And I think that for a large portion of the writing, when I talk about my prison experience, it is also reflective of the relationship between all adults in my life that imprisoned me physically, mentally, and spiritually. And there's culpability, there's enough culpability to go around everywhere. And what I would like people to walk away with is an understanding that if you don't think that it is rational and justifiable for children to be treated the way that I express in that book, we should all look at the way we treat our children. We should all look at the way that we become corrections officers, that we police our children, the way we gaslight, dehumanize, and try to get our children to conform more to being subjects and easily led than leaders and empowering them.
Could you say more about that intersectionality that you realize? Because it's not one that's often spoken about. The most recent example that I have is when we had Ashley Ford as a guest, and she wrote the book Somebody's Daughter, in which she's specifically talking about this relationship between adults in her life and the privileged advantage they take of the unknowingness, innocence, learning state of their children, and then thinking about this state of normalized abuse, especially in terms of when that intersection of adult child is meeting gender, race, and poverty. And so this is another instance where, on Lit Friday, we're hearing this narrative again from another writer, from another experience, about the ways that the adult-child relationship very much mirrors our systems of punishment. And I'm wondering if you could say a little more, even though you've said quite a bit.
Well, I think that it seems to me that, from speaking from the perspective of my former self, the child former self, it seems to me that it's more important for us as a society to change the names of oppression and preserve all of the techniques to break people, dehumanize them, and subjugate them, and then call it something else. And I've seen that across the board. We can talk about the new evolutions of slavery. We can talk about how when we want to do away with oppressions, even in Black struggles, we have we're demanding that African Americans be treated equally, while at the same time treating Black women like we're demanding people stop treating us that way, right? And we shift it. And the same way when it comes to adults, it comes to children. Like, children have no rights. Children are third-class citizens. Children have to depend on us. Children have to be seen and not heard. We preserve all those different techniques that we've accumulated over the years and just call it something else. When it comes to children, we just call it discipline, right? We just call it discipline. And even more so, we say that the Bible supports our position, right? Well, the Bible supported the position for slavery as well, if you ask people who believe that, right? The Bible supports the subjugation of women if you ask men who believe that, right? And we preserve all of those oppressive techniques for somebody else. We want to rid them, we want to rid ourselves of them, but we preserve them somewhere else. And in this case, we preserve them for our kids. So I think that practice is just ubiquitous. It seems to be instinctive in a lot of us, but when we trying to rid ourselves of the chains of the past, we have to rid ourselves of the techniques used to create them too. And that's the most difficult thing for people to do, because once you're free from those things, how do you prevent yourself from becoming those things, right? Because your only system of control and example is what you have been subjected to, right? And I know men and women who actually will tell you that the reason they turned out so well in life is because essentially they were bludgeoned, right? The beating I got, You know, my parents were really hard on me. They tied me up, they put me under the bed. And that's why I turned out so well, right? And I think that's part of the psychosis, right? I read this book once that kind of put things in perspective for me called Spare the Child, why beating children won't save Black America. And it deconstructed all of those myths that we have about spare the rod, spoil the child. And for me, it was empowering because it spoke to systemic racism. It spoke to chattel slavery. It spoke to everything by defending the child. Like, if you can defend the lowest among us, you can literally speak for everybody at once. And when you're speaking for just African-American men, you don't speak for the lowest among us. You don't speak for women. When you just speaking for women, you don't speak for the low. You got to speak for children too. And if you start speaking for the children, from that flows all freedoms in my mind. From that flows all appreciations for humanity. Because at this time, that's the lowest of the low for us. Even our pets are higher than our children, right? So that's a freedom fight that I was willing to wage through writing, and I wanted people to see the connections. I wanted people to see the connections between those, and for me, they were clear.
So a little bit of a switch. Thank you for sharing more, bringing more clarity to this connection for us. I want to talk a little bit about art and its function, sacred place in your life. And I wanted to know, and it's kind of a poetic question, but how did the practice of art, your art practice, help you hold on to your truth as someone who is identifying and able to clearly pinpoint the way oppression emerges from the space that you've just made clearer for us? And so it's like, how did the process of being an artist, specifically a painter, help you hold on to or preserve your truth in an extended environment where that was constantly denied to you?
Well, my art for me was evidence that the people around me were lying about who I was. They were lying when they said that I wasn't worth anything. They were lying when they said I was a piece of crap, wasn't capable of producing anything positive. My life was over. There was nothing meaningful that could come from me. I was incorrigible. So when I would draw and I would paint, and I would see the expressions on people's face when they saw my images. So it was bittersweet, because I would show a person a painting or a drawing, and the response I would get was, "You did that?" which was both complimentary and insulting, right? Like, you did that? Like, I didn't expect that from you, but you did that? Like, I also didn't think that you were capable of anything. So, and I'm acknowledging it publicly through my response, you did that. So for me, it was that evidence that if I could if I could show you something that you could not deny was creative, and your subconscious would betray what you said of me, then it was, for me, it was everything at that time. It was, and then as I grew as an artist, it paved the way for me. Like, I could go anywhere in Graterford Prison with a painting underneath my arm. I went from being called like the N-word inmate, BY3387, to being called the artist, or the guy that can paint real well. Like it literally brought humanity to me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like it was the thing that people saw before I even got there. My painting under my arm, right? And it was a shield, like the shields I started out drawing. Mm-hmm. It was a protection against some forms of abuse. It was COs searching your cell, tossing your cell, and then coming across paintings and like, yo, you did this? Yeah. Oh, wow, this is really nice. And then didn't go so hard on the cell for some reason. It was just like a humanizing element. And and then people purchasing my paintings, right? Like for the first time in my life, I was able to take care of myself through the sale of my paintings. So it was restorative to my humanity, even the parts of my humanity that I hadn't even gotten in touch with because I was still growing up. I was still growing up in prison.
And so what function does art have in your life now? In your bio, we hear about your mural projects and we hear about art being a space of connectivity for you, but how does art meet your career activism today?
So as it stands now, back then I did art, I created art for me, right? But since my release and becoming a community muralist, I create artistic opportunities for other people. Like, just I don't even care about the art anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I care about creating the opportunities, using art as the excuse to bring people together and experience what I experienced as a kid, right? People will communicate. I can go into a neighborhood that I would ordinarily be fearful of turning my back, facing a wall all day, right? And face that wall with a paintbrush and not fear anything because the entire community understands me in context without me having to speak, without me having to announce my presence at all. I'm talking about, and I've painted murals where, for all intents and purposes, people come by looking like gangsters and be like, yo, that's hard right there. that's a testament to the power of art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the people who paint with me feel comfortable in the same spaces. People who may not ordinarily come into our communities feel comfortable enough to come there because there's a mural going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you stand side by side with people who you may not otherwise come into contact with in your daily life, and you're painting with them, you're creating memories, and the mural memorializes those memories. And the next time these people see each other, they're not worried about who's breaking the 3-second rule, staring at each other, or they're like, wait a minute, I know you painted the mural with, yeah. And there's an immediate connection. It's not competitive, it's a connection point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only thing important about it to me now. The only thing important to me. So it was for me then, but it's for other people now.
Thank you. So there's Erie's participatory defense, which I want you to speak more about. So we have more information about what that is, where it is, and your role in it. And also the Federal Defender's Office. You are an individual that is committed to study. You are committed to understanding. And in this way, there's kind of, even I experienced it when I started working where we used to work together. I all of a sudden had this understanding and almost like an emergency, like, oh, there are things about this process that we don't know in general as American citizens that need to be known. But in your time working for the Federal Defender's Office, being a part of Erie's participatory defense, what advice do you find you want to shout from the rooftops that you think everybody needs to know, or that you wish everybody could learn about the environment, this environment that we're discussing?
It might sound simplistic, but the thing I would like people to know is that you can do so much by being kind to people. Like, kindness is so restorative. Through the most traumatic experience, being the exception to the rule, stepping outside of your comfort zone and just treating people like human beings, no matter what they're accused of, no matter what they've done, no matter what they've been through, just treating people like human beings, right? And I've never known anyone at all to become successes because they were bludgeoned into being successes, right? So Erie Participatory Defense, when we started it, came together as a way to support people who were going through the criminal legal system, right? Whether it be loved ones or people personally going through it. And we would offer things like creating social bios, figuring out how to communicate, how people could best communicate with their attorneys, figuring out how to read a docket, um, showing up at court for them or with them as support system, writing letters of support, empowering them, showing them that they have a voice in all of these things, right? And it's since shifted. It merged with Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's participatory defense got started, and Erie's essentially disbanded because of everybody having their own personal jobs and families and stuff like that. And Pittsburgh has since taken that over and is doing a phenomenal job with people like Walter Harris, Malley, and others who were involved in it, right, including Milica for a while. And it essentially gives people somebody to lean on when they're going through that process, right? Just somebody to hear what they're saying and say, yo, I believe you. And there are others who've had similar experiences. And sometimes that's all that people need, right? And connecting the dots, because we don't often know what to expect next, and attorneys aren't really good at communicating with us about those things. And so we try to fill in those gaps. And we've been successful at doing that. Yeah, so the federal public defenders is similarly a platform that can be used to humanize and communicate with people better as well. And in my role as a paralegal, that's what I try to do. That's what I try to bring to it. When I speak to our clients, when I speak to other human beings, like, listen, I understand. I believe you, I appreciate it, and I will do whatever's in my capacity to make sure that these questions get answered, or that messages get conveyed, or that you feel like you're being heard, right? And affirming your humanity. So I bring all of that to both arenas.
Thank you so much again. And then also just because we're on the topic, your book, before you gave the additional insight into the hierarchy, thinking about adult-child relations as like the foundational punishment, right? Because even if we study Black history, we see in, early racial philosophy, the comparison of Black people to children at a certain point, and this kind of like fake evolutionary scale that people very much lived by and made policy by, continue to make policy by in the United States in particular. But now we keep seeing this dialogue bubble to the top around prison abolition. And of course, for me, I don't think it's discussed like enough. I think it's one of the things that we should all be kind of interested in and talking about. But how does your sense of living activism, not just activism in terms of being in a protest or giving a speech, but living every day with an aim towards a goal, a vision of how you want to affect the world, the living activism, does that connect with prison abolition at all?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think part of that is jettisoning the desire for vengeance, right? That seems to fuel resistance against prison abolition, right? And disconnecting from the notion that for me to be safe, other people need to be locked in cages. Mm-hmm. Right? It definitely connects to it in ways that, and even ways I'm still discovering, right? Like believing that people who have lived experiences like mine can't be trusted, or somehow shouldn't be employed in capacities that have them function as members of the team, right? In every arena, including places like the Federal Public Defender's Office, right? Mm-hmm. And disconnecting in those ways also contribute to that perspective about prison abolition. I don't believing that prison is the only solution to every problem. And I don't not, this is not an over exaggeration, because I'm privy to situations where when you get caught speeding and you got a marijuana joint in your car, the solution is put you in a cage, right? Put you in a cage for X amount of time until we can reconcile why you had a marijuana joint in your car. Like if everything results in people being put in cages, at some point, my sense of justice and what my definition of justice becomes, well, I want that to work for all people then. And it's not going to work that way for all people, right? So we got to get rid of it if we ain't going to make it work for all people that way. Because at some point, we all going to be locked up.
Right.
Right. So, yeah.
And so when I wrote this question, I had reservations about using the word recovery, right? Because so often that word is attached to, dialogues about addiction, right? Or illness. But when I think about what I know of your experience interpersonally and what I've read, I often think about the process of coming to as a kind of recovery, a recovery of self, a recovery of autonomy, a recovery from, various physical and mental traumas, a recover from environmentally induced mental illness that may help you make it from point A to point B. What did your recovery after your experience look like?
So your question presumes that my recovery is over, right? I'm still in recovery. It looked like sleepless nights. It looked like cold sweats. It looks like the kind of recovery that you would see following drug addiction, right? The belief that somebody's always out to get you, they're about to take away your freedom, even for the positive things you do, being gaslit, being made to believe that you aren't enough, feeling like you aren't enough when you walk into spaces to seek employment to take care of your family, right? Fearful of people not seeing the tracks on your arm, but seeing the tracks in your history, right? And then making knee-jerk judgments about your future potential, right? Or your liability in an environment that others like you inhabit, but they just don't have the same complexion as you, right? It looked like the same recovery that we know from drug addiction. And I would never make any kind of distinction between the two, because it is just that, the belief that your wife is going to leave you because you aren't aggressive enough, like you've changed your life, and the definition that you have of being a positive role model does not include those aphrodisiacs among those who have been traumatized, right? Speaking in tones where people say that you speak too softly, right? And being judged because of it, right? Like I'm supposed to be more aggressive. Yeah, all those things, man. Yeah, it's definitely recovery, and recovery is the right word. And I'm still going through it, right? When I have to go see my parole officer, worried about whether or not something will be interpreted in a certain way that results in me losing my freedom and being caged, right? Not because of a crime, just because of an interpretation or a miscommunication. Being caged, losing everything, and people not allowing you to live down your past, right? You were this always previously, and you will always be that. I'm still going through it, but I'm finding healthy ways to deal with it. And one of the most important elements in that recovery is having positive people in your life, right? community that respects the process of change, not just the expectation of the final result of change, but the process of it.
Yes.
Right. And running into people who will give you opportunities where you don't even see opportunities, right? Including yourself and others, Jess. And that's one of the most important things. Like, yeah, I'm a part of us now. I am a part of us. I am here. I'm not just here inhabiting a space. I'm actually an integral part of all of us now. And that makes the recovery that much more easier, right? When I can call somebody at, we call it sponsors in the drug world, but when I can call somebody at 2:00 in the morning saying, "Yo, what's up?" No, I'm just thinking, man, everything we've been through and everything, I've called friends who were formerly incarcerated, everything we've been through. Like, these are recovery conversations. And on the other line, I hear one of my friends say, "Man, I was just going through the same thing. I thought I was the only one." No, you ain't the only one. We sponsoring each other right now, essentially, right? Somebody I can always call. And that's really important, because I don't know a time that I made a really negative decision during office hours, right? You need somebody to call after office hours, right?
Yes.
So it's definitely recovery, Jess. You hit the nail on the head.
So the last question, and we're a little over, but this conversation is really, really important to me. And I hope to everyone who's listening, I hope everybody is learning a lot and thinking a lot about what this means for all of us who live in this society, right? But when we think of the global media image of the United States, I think in general, right? If you think of the widest possible swath of people in the United States, oftentimes the information that we know doesn't include some of the harder facts of how we use imprisonment and its place in our life. That slavery is legal if you're imprisoned, according to the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, that more Black people are imprisoned than there were at a certain time in enslavement, that the United States has surpassed the carceral history of Russia's Gulag, which is its carceral system that's gone by many different names, that the sentencing practices are racially applied as a fact of jurisprudence and easy to find. And I often tell people when we're having political debates or debates about the upcoming election, I say, I think people don't realize that if you think of the United States, you have to think of it as a closed room. If you release a lion into a closed room, you may be able to push people in front of you, but it will eventually get to you if you let it out, right? The systems that you support are the systems that will eventually harm you as well after you're finished putting everybody forward. What should everybody know about the carceral system? I asked a similar question about what you wish everybody knew about how to kind of deal with this or what's needed. But what should everybody, from the richest person to the poorest common denominator, which would be our Black, trans, and Indigenous children, right? What is something that everybody should know about the effects of incarceration that's important just to our everyday reality?
The effects of incarceration are intentionally cultivated to be an investment in future returns. If you think for 1 second that a person being put in prison will be subjected to experiences that inspire positive change, that will ensure the safety of society, you're wrong. We are being subjected to experiences that are intended for us to come back out and do the same things that we've done in the past to preserve jobs for people who now depend on the carceral system. And so we are actively contributing to the destruction of our own communities by simply sending people to prison as an immediate solution. The community has to take back its power. The community has to communicate with the people who are in prison don't allow an opportunity where our incarceration, being away from women, being away from influences, clothes, music, money, and all of those kind of things, don't allow that opportunity to fall by the wayside. It's the opportunity you need to be communicating with us. It's the opportunity you need to be inviting us into book discussion groups, sending books that you can talk to the community about. It's an opportunity to build relationships. It's the opportunity to invite people outside of their comfort zone to communicate with the community and experience it in more holistic ways, so that when we come home, we will be beholden to the healthy examples that you've given us while we were in prison, as opposed to believing that everything we've been subjected to, we should purge when we get out because we have no other form of release. But if you try to reach back into the prisons to communicate with us and establish relationships with us that would ensure your safety and our future growth and development, what you will discover is that the prison itself will prevent it. Mm-hmm. And that will be your truest example of what's going on inside and why you're being denied access inside. When if you are the taxpayers and you're paying for this experience and this is what's supposed to happen, what's the big secret? And the secret is that it doesn't have your best interest at heart. And so we need to rethink this entire thing.
Thank you so much, Antonio. Thank you everybody for being with us, sticking with us for an extra 7 minutes. We're gonna sign off now, but it was an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much for your generosity, your knowledge, as well as your vulnerability. We all learned exactly what we needed to learn from this conversation. And everybody go on Amazon and order these books, read all of Antonio's writing, read Antonio's memoirs. I'm gonna say the titles again. We spoke about When a Child is Worth More Than the Worst Mistake He Ever Made Tonight, but there is also A Black Man and a Spear and Love is When You Want the Best, parentheses, for someone else. Support Antonio, go get the books, read them. They are worth every single comma space period. And thank you everybody for being with us tonight. I'll see you on June 30th.